to this edition of the Mama Podcast. And today we're joined by the lovely Penny Hager, who is here from Peeps, the H.I.E charity. So we're going to hear all about Peeps and the support that you offer and your role there, Penny. But to start with, let's hear all about you. Tell us about you, your home life, and what it's like to be a parent.
So thank you so much for inviting me to be on your amazing podcast. I'm very excited to be here. So my name is Penny. I am not quite 40, nearly, but not quite. And my background is that I was a hospital pharmacy technician for many, many years. And then we had our daughter Jess back in 2016. And she was very unwell when she was born. She had what we call a H.I.E event, which is Hypoxic-Ischaemic Encephalopathy, or a lack of oxygen and blood flow to the brain at birth. She was absolutely fine. She was full term. She was fine for around 40 minutes, and then she had a sudden neonatal collapse. And she needed resuscitation. She had a really big seizure. She needed a blood transfusion. And then she had to have what they call cooling therapy. So what that means is that she had kind of in essence, a bubble wrap suit that has cold water pumped around it. So it lowers the body temperature of the baby, and they do that for 72 hours, and then they gradually rewarm the baby. And in Jessie's case, when she was being rewarmed, she wasn't responding as she should be. So they did what they call a lumbar puncture, which is where they take a sample from the cerebral spinal fluid, or CSF, and it showed that she had bacterial meningitis. And she, in addition to that, developed hydrocephalus. At the time, we were, it's a very difficult situation. She was far too poorly, so she had to be taken to a different hospital to the one she was born in. I was still too unwell, so I couldn't go with her. So she was sent to a different hospital around 40 minutes away. I was just in hospital for another couple of days, waiting to be well enough to be discharged so that I could go and see her. And the life that we'd kind of expected changed in that instant when she became unwell. So she has permanent brain damage as a result of that. And she's got quite complex medical needs. So she's got lots of diagnosis, which we just seem to keep adding to. So she's got primarily cerebral palsy, epilepsy, hydrocephalus with a VP shunt, and profound and multiple learning disabilities. But having said that, she's amazing, and she's sassy, and she's always smiling. She just can become very unwell very quickly. So that's our daughter Jess, and then we have our little 4-year-old terror called Benji, who is like our little whirlwind. He's full of the joys of spring, and he just loves running around like a lunatic, climbs on everything. He just loves being outside. So that's us. We're a little family of 4. Our life isn't quite what we pictured it to be, but we love it just the same. We just wish that she wasn't quite so unwell as she is, and that she didn't have the difficulties that she has. That's all.
Wow, you really have been through it, Penny. My gosh, that's a lot. That is a lot. What was it like when, Jess was first born? Because I guess she was in the hospital for quite a while, and you must have had so many questions. You must have been really, really frightened, but have so many questions about H.I.E. Do you know how it happened, why it happened? Um, is there any
So
answers at all?
no, so at the moment, no. So there are so many different reasons for a H.I.E event. So sometimes it can be something that happens during delivery. So it can be something like placental abruption, or it could be just a problem with the placenta, or it could be that, you know, the cord was round the neck or something. We don't know the cause for Jess. It's assumed that I would have been group B strep positive, but by the time they did the test for it, she'd already been started on antibiotics, so they can't prove that it was because I was GBS positive. But what we've been told is that there were kind of 3 likely reasons for her to have the incident. 2 of them were disproved. The third was GBS, but they can't prove it. So the inference is that I was GBS positive. But there's a whole heap of different reasons for a HIE event, and you can't predict it. It's just one of those things that it's the combination for Jess of the hydrocephalus and the HIE event and the meningitis that's caused her difficulties. So we didn't actually find out that she was a HIE baby until it was actually another mum that pointed it out to me, because it was on our discharge paperwork, but I'd never realised that that was a diagnosis. Having said that, obviously at the time, Jess being as unwell as she was, the meningitis and trying to get that controlled kind of overtook everything else. So
Of course.
yeah, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly the reason for her difficulties that she's got, because she's got so many neurological conditions and problems. It's kind of a combination of all the 3 that cause the damage. It's not just one of the issues that she had.
So you mentioned lack of oxygen to the brain. So what exactly is HIE?
So HIE literally is a lack of oxygen and blood flow to the brain. So that's why things like placental abruption, or if there's a problem with the cord clamping or anything like that, that can be the reason for the HIE event. So it's literally anything that causes a lack of oxygen or blood flow to the brain, that is the HIE event. Any other subsequent diagnosis are a result of that HIE event. So the hypoxic-ischemic encephalopathy is the lack of oxygen or blood flow to the brain. And the only treatment for that at the moment is the cooling therapy, or it's called therapeutic hypothermia, is the technical name for it. So they're literally sedating and then cooling your baby for 72 hours. And it needs to be done ideally within 6 hours of birth, is the kind of prime time for that cooling therapy to be started, to give the baby the best chance of survival and best chance of improvement for their brain function, if you like.
Okay, so that's normally done in the neonatal unit, I guess, shortly after birth.
Yeah. So depending on what level unit you are. So there's 3 different levels of a neonatal unit. And only a level 3 unit, which is a more specialist unit, can do the cooling therapy. So it can be started anywhere, but the baby needs to be, because they need to be sedated, they need to be looked after in an intensive care unit, and that at the moment can only be done on a level 3 unit. So that's why lots of mums and babies get separated, because if you're delivering and have your baby on either a level 1 or a level 2 unit, they have to be transferred to a level 3. And unless mum is well enough to transfer with the baby, they have to be separated. And that's a fairly common theme for a lot of the families we support, is that they're separated from their babies at that very early stage.
Okay. Yes, so they'd have to be transferred to Unit 3. And then how long will the baby usually stay in neonatal? Because I guess they'd have to be monitored quite closely for quite some time.
Yeah, so again, it really varies on how well the babies do. So the initial cooling therapy is for 72 hours, and then warming, I believe it's about 48 hours for them to be gradually rewarmed. And then it all depends on how well the baby does as to how quickly they can be stepped down from the intensive care unit to either high dependency or back to normal unit. So some families, it can take a couple of months, some longer. In our case, it was around 3 weeks in intensive care, and then another week back in the hospital that she was born on the level 2 unit before we could be discharged. So we were in for around a month, but it all depends on how the baby does, and what extra help they might need after their HI event as to how long they'll be in for. Unfortunately, it's one of those incidences where there's no crystal ball to say how long the baby will be in for. And obviously there is the other side of things where, because of the type of event it is, sadly not all HIE babies survive. So there is also that to kind of take into consideration as well.
And does this affect, or can this affect absolutely anyone? Are there particular parents that are at higher risk?
So there's not an awful lot of research done into HIE at the moment. The figures at the moment show that it's roughly between 5 to 6 in every 1,000 babies are affected by HIE. It's, from my understanding, it's roughly in correlation with the number of babies who are born and diagnosed with Down syndrome. It's just that what we find and what we hear from a lot of our HIE families is that if you haven't been through a HIE event or know someone who's had a HIE event, you've never heard of it.
Right, so it's not
So
something that you're necessarily
no,
diagnosed with and it's put on your paperwork and you understand what's happened to your baby then.
not until the event has actually happened and you're diagnosed. It's not something that can be predicted. There's no particular group of people where their events seem to be higher. So it's not, the data doesn't show that there's any particular ethnicity that is at a higher prevalence for it happening to. There is some more research being done at the moment, but obviously we don't have those results yet. So we'll wait and see what happens. But at the moment, it can happen to anyone, and it's so unpredictable that until the event has happened, that's, you can't be. Once the event has happened, you're diagnosed, and then you know what your treatment options are, and you have to kind of see how things go from that point. But you can't predict a HIE event. No.
And is there any sort of signs and symptoms that parents can sort of look out for once the baby has been born, or is it usually something that the healthcare professionals pick up on?
So generally, the healthcare professionals kind of pick up on it. So if it's occurring during labour, it's really difficult to. This is a tricky one to answer. So there are some signs that show during labour. So obviously fetal distress and things like that potentially can indicate that there might be a difficulty during labour, and then they kind of monitor. But one of the issues is that just because a baby has a good APGAR at birth doesn't necessarily mean that they won't then go on to have a HIE event. So in our circumstances, I had a fairly lengthy labour, but it was okay as far as labours went. She was around 40 minutes old when she had her neonatal collapse. Now, she may well have been showing signs before she had that collapse, but I don't know. I wasn't in the room at the time. I needed some extra help after having had her. And it was when the midwife went to kind of give her to me that it was noticed that she wasn't quite as she should be. But she had a good APGAR at birth. And again, I think they do the second APGAR at 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and both of them were fine. And then she still had a neonatal collapse. So for some babies, it occurs during delivery, and they know at that point, once baby's been delivered, that they need help, and it's very apparent at that point. In our circumstance, it wasn't until 14 minutes later that it was noted. And for some families, it can happen later on. So babies need monitoring and things like that. So one of the pieces of research being done at the moment is looking into, are there things that should be being done if women have had difficulties during labour, to monitor that baby a little bit more closely afterwards. But that's a piece of research that's being done by somebody else that I won't go into.
That's really interesting. But I guess if something like that happens, like it did to Jess, you're in the right place. You're in
Yes.
hospital, you've got the professionals around you, they can act quickly, they can transfer you to the necessary neonatal unit if that's what needs to happen. It's not something that's going to happen, say hours later once you've got home. Does that ever happen?
I don't think so, no, but don't hold me to it, because there are always going to be exceptions rather than the rule. Um, so I don't want to categorically say that no, that doesn't happen, but from my understanding is that it's more likely within those first few hours of life rather than days later. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And the
And absolutely
statistics.
having the baby in a hospital where you're surrounded by healthcare professionals that were able to, as soon as they realized there was a difficulty, they hit the red button and suddenly the room was filled with about a dozen people, all who knew exactly what they were doing, trying to take care of her and help her as best they could. That's It was so important. As soon as they realized something was wrong, they were right there to become involved, as opposed to us potentially being at home, like you say, where there isn't anyone to help.
Yeah, precisely, precisely. So that must have been a huge help. And statistic wise, what were those numbers again that you mentioned earlier? How many does this affect in the UK?
So from the research, which possibly could be considered slightly out of date now, but the most recent research shows that it's roughly between every 5 to 6 in every 1,000 babies.
Okay, 5 to 6 per 1,000 births.
Yes. But again, to realise that is that although they might all have had a HIE event, some babies, they go on to not have any difficulties later. Some can be very severely affected. So that 5 to 6 covers the whole spectrum of babies. So it's not that 5 to 6 are severely impacted by their HIE event. It's 5 to 6 have had a HIE event.
So how's Jess doing now? Now that she's 8 and she's at school, how's she doing now?
So she's doing quite well. We've had a difficult few months with her. Jess developed hydrocephalus when she was a neonate, and at the time we were lucky it went away on its own, and then it came back again when she was 2.5. She was really unwell, and she had to have what they call a VP shunt inserted. So it's possibly not that nice to think about, but for those of you that want to know, they kind of drill a hole through her skull and they insert a catheter, and then there's a needle that goes through that, which is inserted into the ventricle inside her brain. That connects to a tube which goes down the side of her neck and drains the excess fluid from her brain away. There was a problem with that shunt over Christmas, and she was really very unwell again. And for various reasons, it took them a while to work out that it was a blocked shunt. And eventually she's had her surgery, but unfortunately, she's not quite recovered as well as she has from her previous surgeries. So she's still not quite back to her normal self, but she is smiley. She's going back to school. She's eating and drinking again. There's not a problem with her appetite anymore, which is lovely. Although she did enjoy it when she was allowed to start eating again, and she lost quite a bit of weight, so we had to fatten her up so she was allowed all the things that she's not normally allowed to have under her dietitian's plan. So she made the most of that for sure. But generally she's doing really well. She's happy to be back at school with her friends and trying to do her activities and things. So yeah.
Bless her. And how does she get on with her brother? Because I know my two just fight like cat and dog.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, so they're terrible together. They fight like cat and dog, but in front of other people, they're really loving towards one another. And some of on the school run, some of the mums say, "Oh, it's so lovely that they're so nice." And I say, "But you didn't see them squabbling with each other at home this morning about who was going to hold Spider-Man this morning."
Yeah,
But she loves her brother. She definitely missed him, and he really missed her when we were in hospital. So it's really nice to have them back home playing together.
that's really lovely. That's really
Yeah.
lovely. So let's talk about Peeps.
Yes.
So how did it come about? When did it start? What's your involvement in the organisation?
So back in 2015, Steve and Sarah, who are the charity co-founders, they had their daughter Heidi, and she was a H.I.E baby. And at that time, there just wasn't an awful lot of support around for H.I.E families. Well, there wasn't really any support around. So they decided that to make sure that no other families or were in their situation, that they wanted to kind of start a charity in memory of their daughter Heidi, who just turned 10 last weekend, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was 10, full of disco balls and Strictly Come Dancing. So they started the charity for her, and it's called Heidi Peeps because the nickname she was given on the neonatal unit was Heidi Peeps. They decided to stick with it, and the charity was started back in 2018 in honour of her, and it's called Peeps. We help support any HIE family across the UK, regardless of the cause or outcome. If they have a diagnosis of HIE, we can help support them. And there's an awful lot that we do to help support them. So our three kind of biggest areas are: we provide free parent packs to neonatal units, or if a family's already been discharged, we can post them out directly to them. And it's got bits and pieces in there like baby grows and shower gels and information about the charity in there, so that when a family is ready to come to us for support, they know how to get hold of us. And it's always at the discretion of the family, so it's up to them when they feel ready that they need some support. We also have an equipment grant, which is up to £500, and that's on a needs not means tested basis. So it can be used for kind of a whole variety of pieces of equipment. All we do is ask for a letter from a healthcare professional saying why it would benefit the baby or child. And then kind of our third biggest expenditure is we provide free counselling for families. So we don't do the counselling ourselves. We facilitate that through licensed and trained professionals. So if a family comes to us and they would like some mental health support, we will talk to them through our family liaison workers and work out, would they like a virtual or a face-to-face session, and talk about what their needs are. And then we'll find a licensed trained counsellor that kind of fits the criteria that we need. We can generally arrange that within a few days. So as we all know, sometimes with the NHS, it's a bit of a postcode lottery as to where you live, as to how quickly you can access that kind of support. Sometimes it's anywhere between kind of 12 and 18 months. We can generally arrange it within a few days, particularly if it's a virtual session that a family would prefer. So they're kind of our three biggest expenditures through the charity. We've got an amazing peer support service, which is all sorted through our volunteer coordinator. And all of the peer volunteers, the peer support volunteers, they have got lived experience of HIE. So they're either a HIE parent or a grandparent or a carer of somebody who's had a HIE event. So when they're helping support another HIE family, their stories are not exactly the same, but you've been through something similar, so you've got that level of empathy, and that's a really very well received and used service. And then we do things like we have our in-person Peeps events called Peeps Together, and they're places which are always fully accessible for families, and they're places where families can go to kind of meet up and maybe have a coffee or a conversation or a picnic and things like that. And then we've got our social media groups and our very popular WhatsApp group, which feels like it goes off at all hours of the night. But it's a safe space for those families to kind of have those conversations that other families might not necessarily understand. And then on the other side of things, we have a specific bereavement support service for HIE bereaved families, and that's called Sully's Fund, which was very lovingly set up in memory of baby Sullivan. And that's all done on a very one-to-one basis. So the charity will help support those bereaved families on a one-to-one basis and see whatever it is we can do to help those families. So we've got specialist bereavement counselling, and we've got a specific fund for those families and things like that, and we'll help them however we can in that situation. So
Gosh,
there's quite a lot that we do. Even though we're a small charity, we've increased from when I started back in 2013. We were 5, we're now up to 8. So we're a small charity. I like to think we're small but mighty.
definitely. Gosh, that's a lot of support for so many people. That's fantastic. And what support did you find that really helped you after Jess was born?
So Jess was born back in 2016 and Peeps hadn't yet come to fruition. So us as a family, we struggled a little bit during that time. Then Jess became a little bit older and we'd got a little bit more settled with where we were at with her, and I started attending a special children's group. And one of the mums had heard about this amazing charity called Peeps. And there happened to be 3 or 4 H.I.E mums with their babies all at that group at that same time. We all went on our phones and registered at exactly the same time. So we all registered as soon as the charity came into fruition, just so that we could kind of see what was happening with other families and things like that. So I didn't receive any support as such from Peeps, but I was aware of them and I knew what was going on, and I joined kind of their WhatsApp group and things like that as a way to help help me
Mm,
overcome some of the difficulties that I got, because it's quite hard being thrown into the world of HIE. It's obviously very unexpected, and nobody really understands the difficulties apart from other people who have been through a similar journey to you. I never like to say everybody's journey is the same, because it's not. So a
no.
similar journey. So that kind of gave me some support, even though it's, there's always somebody else who's awake at the same time as you somewhere in the country. So if you've got a question and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody else will be awake at the same time and they're there on the end of the phone if you need them. And I
And
kind
you
of
could
really needed
probably,
that sometimes.
yeah, absolutely. And you probably still need it now as well, I would imagine. And I expect when you were receiving that support at that time, you could see how invaluable that would have been to you at an earlier stage as well. That's probably what makes you so passionate about all these support services that you deliver.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we had our daughter, she was obviously really unwell, and the place that I worked before, it just wasn't going to work out for me to return to work there. So I stopped working, and I hadn't actually intended to return to work, but the relationships officer role for Peeps was advertised, and I hadn't actually spoken to my husband about it at that point, and he came home from work and I said to him, "So I've applied for a job," and he said, "Oh, I thought you weren't going to go until Benji started at school next September." I was like, "Yeah, I know, but I really wanted this one." So I applied for it, and I was very luckily considered and given the role. But as you say, it's something that I know and I've been through myself, and I when I'm talking to people like yourself and to some of the trusts and other organisations and charities that I work with, because I have got that lived experience, when people are asking me questions, I can say to them exactly how hard it is and how difficult things can be. And Jess is now 8, and I think we're up to 17 healthcare professionals that are involved with her care, not including her school case officers and things like that. I think we're up to 17 healthcare professionals. And for the families that we help support, some of them have far more people involved with them than we do. And that is the reality. So it's Peeps was kind of a lifeline for me in more ways than one, not just from a support point of view, but actually it gave me the chance to help other HIE families like ours in the role that I have. So it just happened to come up at the right sort of time for me.
Yeah, definitely. So how long have you been doing that now?
So I started November 2023. So
Coming
maybe
up,
18 months, give or
yeah,
take a little
coming
bit.
up to 18 months.
Yeah,
Wow. And you've
yeah.
not looked back since.
No, I haven't. I hit the ground running. The very first meeting that we had, I we did a project with Pilot Light, to look at ways to kind of help further the charity and look at what the charity's goals were going to be and things like that. So my very first working day, I travelled from southeast London up to Manchester to meet the team who I'd never met in person before, as well as lots of other people, and there were some of the trustees there as well and things like that, which was not quite what I was expecting on my first day of work, but it worked out wonderfully. So I'm very proud to be a part of the Peeps team.
And we've seen each other twice in the last
I
year.
know, I know, just in the first year.
I know,
And that's
that's how busy you
yeah,
are. That's how much you get around.
I know, exactly. And you know, working with other charities and organisations such as yourself, it highlights that there are different needs and every family has got a need somewhere. So meeting other organisations and helping raise awareness and spread the word and collaborate on pieces like this is so important, because there might be some of your listeners who have had a H.I.E event who have never reached out for support, or they don't know where to go for support. So it's an opportunity for them to hear about us, but also for other people to hear a little bit about H.I.E and what it can mean for families. So maybe not them directly, but maybe one of their friends or relatives has had a H.I.E baby, and it just helps explain things a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah, that's what I've got out of this session today, is that it's all about awareness, and some parents, might still have some sort of unanswered questions, and this might help to put together a few pieces of the puzzle for them. So I guess if someone is listening who's possibly recently had a baby, or had a baby in the last, I don't know, couple of years, and they're listening to this and they're thinking, oh, actually that could be me, and I'm quite struggling here, what advice would you give them?
So my first bit of advice is that you are not alone. To head over to our website, which is www.peeps-hie.org. You can fill out a really simple registration form that simply just asks for your name and email address and phone number. You can complete that, and then one of our family liaison workers will get in touch with you and see how we can help support you. We also have an accessibility toolbar on that website. So if English isn't your first language, you can change it into whatever language you need it, and it will translate the whole website for you. So if you want some more information about H.I.E, you can do that. Have a look at the website. There's some resources and downloads on there with information leaflets about the charity and about H.I.E on there. You can access, once you've filled in the registration form, you'll be able to kind of access our social media and WhatsApp groups and things like that if you want some more informal support. It's entirely up to you. It's whatever those families need, they can contact us and we can go from there and help support them.
That's absolutely fantastic. The website sounds great. And I know you've provided information for our website as well. So thank you so much for that. It's everybody can access all this different information in lots of different ways. But thank you so much, Penny, for joining us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. And yeah, I just wish you guys, especially Jess, all the best on your journey.
Thank you so much. The charity here is to help raise awareness of H.I.E and help support those families. And the National H.I.E Awareness Day is the 4th of April, so it's coming up just in the next week or so. So I'm sure there'll be lots of things all over social media about us at that point as well. So hopefully any family that's out there that might be struggling, please do feel free to get in touch. And if we're not the right charity, it's absolutely fine. We can help signpost to other places that might be able to support as well. So please get in touch with us if you need us.
Wonderful. We will definitely be following on the 4th of April. We'll be busy pinging off your or your posts far and wide.
Our
No
posts
problem.
and sunflowers. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Right, you take care, Penny.
Thanks, Heidi.